Welcome to the Huntington Way Show, where we help parents navigate the educational maze. I'm Yvonne Strachan, your host for the Huntington Way Show, and I am an author and founder of inspirationalhomeschooling.com. Today, I am speaking with Israel Wayne. We are going to be talking about navigating through childhood and adolescence into adulthood. I want to thank our sponsors, the Huntington Learning Center and Inspirational Homeschooling, for bringing this show to you. And you're listening on Power Talk 1040 AM, 98.5 FM, and 95.7 FM. Please like and subscribe to Power Talk 1040 on YouTube. Welcome to the show, Israel.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you here. Let's start with your story. You have an incredible story from childhood all the way to how you're serving today.
Well, my mother was one of the founding pioneers of the homeschooling movement. She began homeschooling my older sister and myself in 1978, which was about 5 years before the modern day homeschooling movement began in 1983. In 1988, she started publishing a national homeschooling magazine. That publication ended up becoming the nation's longest running Christian homeschool magazine. And so she was an author, conference speaker back in the 80s and 90s and 2000s. And so I grew up kind of on the homeschool conference circuit and working with Christian publishing and homeschool publishing. I began as marketing director for her magazine and publishing company in 1993. And so I've been full-time in this kind of work for about 31 years now. I wrote my first book on homeschooling in 2000. Actually started homeschool conference speaking myself in the mid 1990s. As a homeschool graduate, I was one of the earlier homeschool graduates in the nation. I graduated from homeschooling in 1991, so was kind of way out there in the early cusp of that. And so I started getting invited to speak at conferences, mostly because people knew who my mother was, and I was a tag along. But before long, I started keynoting. So by like 1995, I was keynoting homeschool conferences, and I've been doing that ever since. I married my wife, Brooke, in January of 1999. So we just celebrated 25 years of marriage. She was also homeschooled. Her mom started homeschooling her in 1983, and her mother was one of the co-founders of the Arizona State Homeschool Association. So we both kind of grew up in leadership side of homeschooling, and I've just been in it my whole life. It's been something I've benefited from a lot. My wife and I have 11 children, ages 24 down to almost 3. And all of our children have been homeschooled from birth. So being homeschooled, working professionally in the homeschool publishing space, and being a homeschool conference speaker and author, and then homeschooling our 11 children, I sometimes joke I'm somewhere between chronically and terminally homeschooled. I think I'm definitely a lifer.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So, traveling the circuit with your mom, that must have been so incredibly impactful to your journey.
It really
So
was. We got to
go
we
ahead.
got to hear a lot of the pioneers of the homeschool movement. So, the people like Raymond and Dorothy Moore and Michael Ferris and Chris Klicka and all these, names that a lot of people don't even know anymore. But the people, Jonathan Linval, these people who laid the foundation for homeschool ideology and philosophy and all that. I grew up getting to read their articles in my mom's magazine. She launched a lot of people's careers that are now kind of legendary. In terms of introducing them to the homeschool world, like John Taylor Gatto and Samuel Blumenfeld, and just a lot of those kinds of names. And so it really, me hearing them do seminars and read their articles was a big part of shaping my educational worldview and philosophy.
Yeah. Now, I'm aware of the fact that your childhood was kind of tough,
Yeah.
and so I'm thinking about society today, and we can look around everywhere and see breakdowns of families.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in your perspective, what has shifted in the culture to cause families to break down?
Well, there's so many things. I think that we've kind of broken away from our foundation. So I'm a Christian, and so obviously for me, God's word, the Bible, is the foundation that guides my life. And when we lose a fixed reference point for morality in society, then all ethics and morality become relative. and people just decide that they can make up their own rules. They can be their own God. They can decide for themselves what they think is right and what they think is wrong. And so you really move away from just some of those things like the importance of keeping your word and being honest and faithfulness and fidelity and a lot of those kinds of things. And so obviously marriage has been really cheapened in terms of the way that our society views it. We've entered an era of no fault divorce where people can just walk away from their marriage without blinking, and that leaves devastation, in the lives of children and them trying to pick up the pieces of that. And there's so much research that indicates how powerful the influence of having a stable home environment with two parents in the home who love the children and provide that nurturing and that stability. When you lose that, you just have so much more likelihood for drug abuse and sexual promiscuity and all kinds of societal breakdown, criminal activity, even in prisons. Right, we have so many places that we can point to and see the devastation that's the result of growing up without stable home environments, without father influence. I don't remember if it's 80, 90%, but it's somewhere up there of young people who are in juvenile detention centers and even prisons that just grew up without positive influences of fathers in the home. And so, from my viewpoint, it really is a situation where we need to return to biblical morality and have a foundation for our homes that provides the stable foundation for society.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit it right on the head there. So I grew up in a home where my father was abusive, and my parents divorced when I was 16. And so it was an incredibly impactful thing in my life. I just felt really down on who I was, it just really brings you down. But the faith, Christian faith, the Bible, studying our Bibles and really filling up with other people that have those same beliefs and can hold you up can make a huge impact. And it sounds like in your life that has made a huge impact, and it certainly has in mine as well. So that leads me to think that this makes a big impact it can make a big impact in cultures and preserve families. And I'm sure you have a lot to say about that. So can you fill us in on some of your thoughts?
Sure. Well, even though I was raised in some ways in a good Christian environment, my parents did divorce when I was 6, and I also had an abusive stepfather from about 6 to 15. So, yeah, I had some bumpy patches along the way. But one of the things that I think the Bible helped me to understand was that we don't have to be defined by our upbringing. We don't have to be defined by our parents. We aren't stuck in some sort of fatalistic, deterministic framework, that we do have the opportunity with God's help to transcend whatever kind of abuse or dysfunction that we grew up with, and we don't have to repeat the cycle. And so for me, that was really something that was encouraging and positive for me to realize that I could start an entirely new chapter for my family, that I could have a marriage and I could have a family that was unlike the one that I grew up with. And that I could take the good from my childhood, because there were many good elements that were there. I could take that forward with me, but I could lay aside the bad. And so, my wife and I have been very blessed to have, as I said, for 25 years, the kind of marriage that my parents didn't enjoy. And our children have had the ability to have the stability of a two-parent family in the way that I wasn't able to. And so I think sometimes within the framework of people who really don't know God, the way they tend to respond about situations like that is to become very angry and bitter about it, and yet that doesn't help you to move forward. And so I've just found that there's great benefit in learning how to be able to move past that, to not be defined by it, and to realize that we can do better. That we don't have to simply be the product of our upbringing, but that we really can move past that and provide a future that's better than our past.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think really part of that is having a mission statement in your home. And I'm sure you have one. Do you want to share that?
Yeah, so we actually created a banner that's in our living room, and if you come visit our home, it's in the high traffic area that we go through every day. So we look at it. And ours is a kind of a collection of a number of different Bible verses, but it says that we exist to know, love, and serve God, and to love and serve others. And so that helps us to be able to remember why we're on the planet, what our goal is, and to be able to evaluate opportunities that arise and to be able to ask ourselves, will this help us to stay on mission to accomplish our purposes, or does this take us off mission? Because ultimately, we're either going to live for the love of God and others, and the love and service of God and others, or the love and service of ourselves. And most
Mhm.
people, I think, go through life loving and serving themselves. And that leads to a lot of dysfunction. It leads to a lot of heartbreak and relational difficulties. And so simply remembering that we're not here ultimately to please ourselves. We're here to serve God and to love and serve other people. And we're most fulfilled when we do that, that we actually have the greatest happiness and fulfillment when our lives are consumed with making others' lives better. We find that it really gives us the most amount of fulfillment ourselves as well.
Yeah, I concur. If I'm serving someone else, I am really happy whenever I
Absolutely.
have that opportunity. Yeah, absolutely. So we want to raise our kids in light of this. And so a lot of times as parents, we can look at their behavior and go, okay, well, you did this wrong or you did this right. And we start with the correction and the discipline. But what is the difference between disciplining a child that way versus really focusing on cultivating their heart change?
I have a lot of thoughts on that. I think the first one that I think about is I think of children in our home as being kind of like a thermometer. And so we look at their behavior and we can kind of get an indication of the emotional or spiritual temperature of our home. And sometimes we look at their behavior and we don't like the temperature and we complain about it and we say, hey, there's some coldness here. We don't really like these attitudes, etc. But I've found that as a parent, I believe that we're really thermostats and that we can actually change the temperature of the relationship of our home by focusing on changing us. And so oftentimes our attitude is transferable. Like they often say that more is caught than taught in parenting. And so when we have bad attitudes, when we're angry, when we are frustrated with our children, when we're responding to them in a negative way, we often pass on that kind of negative attitude and then they transfer it to one another and they have conflict and so forth. So I think quite often the most important thing that we need to do in teaching our children is to focus on us first, to look at our hearts and to correct our own behavior before we seek to correct theirs. But then also, I think it's important for us to not merely correct behavior, but to try to look at the heart behind the behavior and ask ourselves, why are they acting out? Why are they doing the things that they're doing? And find ways to address more of the heart issue than simply the actions. Because if you're just focusing on the actions and you're never getting to the root, then you'll just spend your whole life doing that and you'll never actually resolve anything. Nothing will ever progress or move forward. So ultimately, we have to try to get down to the why behind the what. What is it that's going on in the inside of them that is causing them to act out in these ways? And if we can address the why questions, we're going to have a lot more effectiveness than simply telling them to stop doing bad things and start doing good things.
Yeah, that's great advice. Well, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation. Welcome back to the Huntington Way Show. You're listening on Power Talk 1040 AM, 98.5 FM, and 95.7 FM. Please like and subscribe to Power Talk 1040 on YouTube. I'm Yvonne Strachan, and I'm speaking with Israel Wayne. We're talking about navigating through childhood and adolescence into adulthood. So, Israel, I love how you articulated the idea of shifting from control to influence when raising kids in your book, Raising Them Up. And so let's unpack some of those thoughts on this throughout the different stages of childhood.
So when a baby is first born and we're holding that infant in our arms, we make every choice about that baby's life. They can't get up and walk around, feed themselves, change their clothes. They can't do any of that. Like they rely 100% on us. And so we dictate to them when they're going to eat, when their diaper will be changed, if they get to move from one location to another. We have 100% control over the life of that infant. But then when you fast forward to the age of 21, let's say, most parents have really 0% control over the life of that 21-year-old. And our goal is, as parents, to figure out how to shift from a paradigm of control when they're first born to one of influence. So when they're born, we have 100% control and 0% influence. And what I mean by that is, like, you could tell your infant baby who you want them to vote for in the next election, right? But they don't even understand your language, right? So that you're passing on of your beliefs or preferences or opinions are really ineffective with your infant. But when you have a young adult, you don't have control over them, but hopefully you have influence. So our goal is to go from 100% control, 0% influence when they're born, to 0% control and 100% influence when they're 21 and beyond. And so there's a transition that has to happen from that early stage to the later stage. What I notice is that some parents, when their children are toddlers, rather than influencing them with authority, and really realizing that somebody in this relationship needs to be the parent, and that means directing the young child, they sort of let the child be in the driver's seat. They let the child dictate policy. They let the child tell the parent what the rules are and who's going to obey them. And you see many dynamics where the 2 or 3-year-old runs the house and the parent obeys the child. And that ends up being really toxic, and it's very ineffective. And so when that authority is never established in the early years, then what I find is that you have scenarios when the child's 15, 16 years old, and you have a 6'2", 180-pound teenager in your house, and you ask them to take the trash out, and they say, "No, I don't want to take it out. You take it out yourself." What do parents do at that point? Then all of a sudden they try to exert control over their teenager, and it's completely ineffective. So I just think it's really important for us not to get the cart before the horse, that we have to remember that in those toddler years, the child does not know what's best for them. They're not wise. They're not discerning. They don't know how to make the best choices for their lives. And they really need the parent to be an authority figure and to make those decisions for them. And then in the tween years is really when we begin the transition very seriously, that like 8 to 12-year-old range in particular, of helping them to learn how to think through and navigate through decisions and begin to have more agency, I guess. And particularly as they show that they're capable and they're able, and they prove that they're trustworthy with responsibility, then we give them more responsibility and we give them more opportunity. And so it's a transition, it's a process. But as you said, I talk about it in my book, Raising Them Up, Parenting for Christians, about how to walk through that process.
Yeah, no, that's great. And my husband's a retired police officer, so he often has gone to those homes where they try to exert that control later on. And he's come home frustrated many times, like, "Oh, it's so funny. They think that they can now do this when they haven't done this for years and years." So you're right, it just doesn't work. So the idea of parents passing on the baton to their children as they near adulthood paints a picture of how one might navigate through that stage with their children. And so how might this picture give people more peace in the process?
Yeah, I think really, our children, again, they listen to what we say, but they watch how we live. And so we really have to model for them the kind of life that we want them to live. It's not just telling them to follow these rules or these guiding principles of life, because they'll hear us say those things, but they really watch what we do. So we really have to have a very intentional mindset of modeling for them. Like if we want them to be good with finances, we need to model that. If we want them to know how to forgive people, we have to forgive others. If we want them to learn how to be patient and reasonable in how they deal with others, we need to do that. And so going back to the issue of influence, there are two primary factors that help us to purchase influence, if you will. I think of it kind of like a commodity that you can buy. And so if you want to have influence in the life of your child, particularly in those teen and young adult years, there's two things you have to purchase to be able to do that. And the first one is time. That's by far the most important. And this is a little bit of an overstatement, but not much. Whoever spends the most time with your child wins. And for most parents, that's not them. The US government says the average mom today spends 1 hour a day with her children, and the average dad, it's 29 minutes. So most
Wow.
parents will never be the most influential force in their child's life. And so if we want to have influence in those later years, we need to spend more time, sheer hours, with our child than anyone else in their life. And then the second thing is affirmation. And I would say whoever spends the most time with your child and affirms him or her the most will have the most influence. And obviously, as parents, we want that to be us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, those are both phenomenal thoughts. So we're about out of time. And so I just wanted to talk about your resources. I know I mentioned this one, Raising Them Up. This is a great book for all parents all the way through adulthood. And I love your last chapter where you talk about parenting by grace, because the whole idea is, we're not in control. God is, and he can work in the hearts of those children, and he knows where they need to be directed to. So wherever we miss out, he will fill in, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, ultimately, we can't take all the blame for parenting
Mhm.
when our children make choices that we don't want them to. We also can't take all the credit when things go well. Our job as parents is really not to be responsible for outcomes, but it is to be responsible for input. And we
Yeah,
need to make sure that we're being faithful on that front.
yeah, absolutely. So other resources that you have, Pitching a Fit, and a few websites. What are your websites?
FamilyRenewal.org is really the best one. And if you go there, there's a store tab and you can purchase all of our resources at our web store. So familyrenewal.org/store. And if you order from our web store, we'll send you personally signed copies of all of our books. So that's something Amazon won't do for you. So we appreciate it when you support us at familyrenewal.org.
Great. Thank you so much, Israel. This has been Yvonne Strachan on the Huntington Way Show, where we support you in educating your kids.